Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. So, this is another session. I believe this is the closing session for um, today's lecture and practicals. And we'll be looking at carbon credit for beginners, understanding the basics. Now, carbon credits, let me tell you what carbon credit is not. Carbon credit is not borrowing credits or accessing credits from Carbon Microfinance Bank. That's a whole different ballgame on its own. Carbon credits is a concept that has been ongoing for centuries in all other countries. It's a buzzword now in Nigeria, but it has been ongoing for centuries. The concept is just around the principle of do not, as a farmer or as farmers or as agribusiness person or as players in the industry, your earnings from your production alone will not be enough to cater for the whole operation and administrative work in the farm. So what other ways can you generate revenue? That is farming the unfarmed. So we'll be looking at the basics of carbon credits. We'll be looking at other ways by which we can earn from what we did not initially plan to farm. So moving on. My name is Atolagbe Emmanuel. I am the chief agronomist here at Soilless Farm Lab. And that's my number and email should you have any question after this session. Now, what is the objectives? What is the objectives? What is the scope that we're looking to cover in this basics? Number one, to understand the meaning of carbon credits. Two, who are those in the industry that buys carbon credits? Who are those in Nigeria that buy carbon credits? Who are those in Nigeria that sells carbon credits? How the carbon credit system works. Benefits of carbon credits. How to buy carbon credits. Criticism, challenges, and all whatnots around carbon credits. So this is the proper introduction for carbon credits. Carbon credit is like a permission slip. So a permission to pollute a ton of CO2 into the atmosphere. Now, CO2 is only taking the forefront. It is not CO2 alone. We have other gases like the nitrates that pollute the atmosphere. After CO2 is the nitrates, we have the likes of methane and all others. But because CO2 is the leader of these gases when it comes to pollution, that is why it is taking the head front. While industries generate CO2, farming activities generate nitrates. But that is not about that. We're discussing the basics of the carbon credits. So what's the purpose of this course or this slide or this presentation? The main goal for the creation of carbon credits is the reduction of emissions of carbon dioxide and other gases from industrial activities to reduce the effects of global warming. That is, an industry is tasked to say you have been allocated a portion of CO2 that you have to generate. If you generate more than the required CO2 into the atmosphere, you pay a certain fee That is what it means. It's just like a permission slip, that like a parking slip or parking slot slip. That if you have to park in this place, you can park anywhere else. But if you have to park refuse here, you will pay for dumping this refuse here. That's just what it means. So what are the buyers of carbon credits? So you have the likes of fossil fuel industries, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, and other services. For fossil fuel, you have Dangote Oil, Dangote refineries, although it's not here. It will be when it kickstart operations fully and start selling. We have the likes of Shell, you have the like of Chevron, you have the likes of NNPC. You have pharmaceuticals also, although they are no more in the country, but we have the like we used to have the likes of GlaxoSmithKline, Pfizer. If you know any other pharmaceutical company that currently produces, I think there's one in Kwara that produces two more. Can't remember the name now. I mean, paracetamol. We have the transportation industries, manufacturing, the Ajaokuta steel that this administration is trying to revive. Once they kickstart operations fully, they will be included in this slide. Ajaokuta steel should be here for the manufacturing of steel. Transportation industries, aviation industry, the Nigerian Aviation Services, Arik, Dana, Kostaris, that's Maduka. You have Airpeace. These are buyers of carbon credits because their operations involve them churning gases into the atmosphere. Gases that causes global warming, that causes climate change, that causes problems to the atmosphere. But these operations are necessary. They are necessary to facilitate man's livelihood, to facilitate just our well-being. You know, I don't think there is anything we can do in the country now without using fuel or petrol. We are so dependent on it. We are so into it. Same thing with pharmaceuticals. Same thing with every other services that involve that cannot be shut down because they contribute CO2 into the atmosphere. Should we be thinking, why not just shut it down? It takes a consistent effort. It takes a consistent attention to details from the federal government to say, oh, see, we're generating this amount of CO2 in the country. And according to the Paris Agreement, we're not supposed to generate this, and that. So for that, we're providing a cap for you to generate this amount. If you generate above this amount, you pay a certain fee. So that is what this is all about. That is what this is all about. But how do this industry get carbon credits? I mean, the pharmaceuticals, the manufacturing, the Ajaokutas of this world. Number one, it's either you reduce your emission rates, and how do you do this? You plant new trees or you protect existing ones. So you see the likes of Dangote saying they are into agriculture, they are into forestry now, they planted so number of things. This is the reason, not because they just woke up one day and they want to get into tree production or farming. By supporting projects that switch from fossil fuels to renewables. So we have the CNG conversion of fossil fuel cars to CNG that is being done by this administration, that by 2025, we should have about 1 million cars in Nigeria that has been converted to CNG. Yeah. Measure and monitor. quantify the emission reduction achieved through, yes, so the second step is to measure and monitor the amount of emissions that these projects can take out from you, quantify the emissions reduction achieved through this project. So if you plant 1 million trees, how many tons of CO2 is it likely to relieve you of? So you have an industry where you are dispensing about, for example, 1 million ton of 1 million ton of CO2, but you've planted trees that can only take out 500,000 tons of CO2. That means you need to still balance it out by planting more trees to relieve you of 500,000 extra that you're generating. So it's like balancing, keeping your fossil fuel emission in check. Register the projects, generate carbon credits, sell and trade carbon. Next slide. The buying and selling of carbon, that is carbon trading. So a cap is set by the government. A cap just means a limit is set by the government. The limit is because you are into this industry, you are permitted to generate this amount. But if you exceed this amount, you must pay this amount of money, or you must do these projects, you must plant these trees. A cap is set by the government's registries, compliance markets, carbon credit registries, where companies that exceed their carbon allowance can buy carbon credits from organizations that sells them. That is, continue to pollute the air, but you are going to pay for it anyways. Allocation, company receive or buy carbon credits. Then companies can trade carbon credits in the markets. So we've talked about how to generate credit for yourself to be able to sell. It's either you create a project that can offset the number of ton of carbon from the company that generates this, then if you have a lot of carbon you're offsetting from the atmosphere, you can allocate your innuendos to these companies. So just a pointer, Africa has the vast majority of natural resources, such as forests, which can serve as carbon credits. Else, many companies who sell carbon credits have found our continent as a good ground for carbon credit, meaning any investor can just set up an initiative to say, oh, I want to start selling carbon. Their next destination is Africa because of our wildlife, our trees, just some parts of Africa that's still maintaining that lushness, that greenness, that evergreen, They settle there, they calculate the number of carbon, they allocate a place to themselves, or by the government allocate a place to them and say, oh, you are in charge of this place. So it's like you're measuring land to sell. So the land you're measuring to sell, what is the value? That is, what is the value of CO2 that it can offset? Moving on. What are the benefits of carbon credits? So we have the environmental benefits. This list is not a conclusive list. You have a whole lot more. We have economic benefits. So for the environmental benefit, reduces overall greenhouse gas emissions, encourage investment in reforestation, reducing dependence on oil exports, supports Nigeria's nationally determined contribution. That is, the carbon credit help Nigeria promise to achieve under the Paris Agreement. The help that said, oh, we're not going to generate this amount of carbon. or we are going to plant this amount of trees to uptake this carbon from the atmosphere. What are the economic benefits of carbon credit? Create a financial incentive for companies to reduce emission, support sustainable development projects, access to climate finance, foreign exchange earnings. So you can see now that we've discussed the benefits of carbon credit. It's on the benefit of the person, companies, farmers, the country at large. Now, yes, you plant trees, but we have vast number of trees in Nigeria that are just lying fallow and nobody is earning from them. So that is why in the beginning of the course, I mentioned something like farming the unfarmed. That is, these things were naturally birthed here, except you did plantation of trees. But you have places where they are just naturally existing. On your farm, on your friend's farm, this and that. Yours is to look for ways to say, oh, my farm is situated here, but there's another section of the farm that I didn't cultivate at all, but can also be giving me something, can also be contributing to the environmental benefits and economic benefits to my establishment. So, moving on. So, how carbon credits are created? So you have the emission reduction projects. I mentioned the CNG initiative by the federal government, which reduced Nigerians' reliance on petrol and promotion of cleaner energy sources. This has kickstarted already. By 2025, we're expected to have 1 million cars in Nigeria with conversion that has converted to CNG. We have the Nigerians Clean Energy Transport Project, which promotes electric vehicles and renewable energy power charging infrastructure. Then we have the reforestation and afforestation projects by different um, uh, uh, companies, and we have the Ogun State Forestry Carbon Sink Project, which aims to restore 10,000 hectares of degraded forest. And by the way, if you come into Soides, um, we have a session where you park your cars. That is, you cannot take your fuel cars into the farm. And that is because we want to create carbon credits in the future. We're looking at the way to centralize it and make it make sense. So what is the carbon credit market? We have the primary market, we have the secondary market. For the primary market, you are so the industry, that is the transportation industry, the oil industry, they purchase directly from the project developers. The project developers are people that have identified key areas. The carbon credit markets are divided into two. We have the primary market and the secondary market. Direct purchase. So for the primary markets, the project, the industry player, the manufacturing, pharmaceutical, fossil fuel industry purchase directly from the project developers. By project developers, people that have identified key locations in Africa where they can create a carbon credit scheme and sell off. Then we have the secondary market, more like the middleman that trading between companies and individuals. Next. So how can farmers sell carbon credits? How can farmers sell carbon credits? Develop a carbon credit project. So you can either partner with organization developing these projects, such as reforestation or sustainable agricultural initiative. Like I mentioned, if you come into Soilis, you would have noticed some of the trees that were planted along the alleyway. Then around the farm also, we have trees, timber. We have the likes of Melina, the likes of oil palm that have good carbon reception rates. Register with a carbon credit standard. So this is like a certification body. You can't just go about creating projects and selling of carbon. You have to register and be certified. So you have the verified carbon standard and you have the gold standard. Gold standard is more of impacts driven. Register project with verified carbon standard, a leading carbon credit standard. So they certify you and the likes. Remember, this is the basics. So that's find a buyer and an exchange. So we have an exchange. We have the African Carbon Credit Exchange, where you can sell carbon credit on the exchange. We have the Nigerian Carbon Credit Project also. We have the private buyers. So what are the criticism and challenges? Number one, lack of local benefits. So you have many that argue that carbon credit schemes only benefit foreign companies and investors. But revenue generated is not reflected in the GDP of the country as a whole. Now, because of how abstract this might be, there is limited participation of local communities. So local communities are not always involved in projects, carbon credit projects, leading to potential conflict and resentment. Transparency and accountability issues. You have the environmental social risk issues. You have the equity concerns. These are concerns about the transparency, for the transparency issues and accountability of carbon credit projects in Nigeria. It's not open. Critics are worried about it. So our issue is always peculiar, and any issue that comes with money is always a very big challenge, a major challenge, as a nation, as a people. Trust has been lost, we are not in a high trust community. We used to be high trust community in those days, We hear the stories of how night markets, people would just put their goods outside and put the number of the costs. They estimate the cost with the number of stones they put beside their goods. So when you get there, you put the money on the table, then you take the goods, Those are the days of high trust community. But what we have now, we have very big issues with trust issues. So what environmental concerns? So because of how valuable carbon credit scheme is, you have livelihoods that are being jeopardized. You have people that are being displaced because they want to plant trees and generate carbon credits. Then we have the equity concerns. So critics argue that the global carbon credit scheme can perpetuate existing inequalities, where wealthy countries and corporations are able to buy their way out of reducing emissions, while poorer countries like Nigeria bear the brunt of climate change impacts without sufficient support. But this is not peculiar to Nigeria. This is not peculiar to this sector. It's a major developing country problem where developed country prey on developing countries because of their wealth of resources. So thank you. Moving on, let's just recap. So the objectives were able to understand what the carbon credit initiative means. So you have the is permission slip to say, oh, a particular industry, your industry generate this amount of carbon, but if you exceed it, this is the permission slip, this is the amount you must pay. So it's a permission to pollute the environment. Who buys carbon credits? We look at the fossil fuel, we look at the transportation, we look at the manufacturing. How the carbon credit system works. We look at government, industry registry, setting a cap for individuals who generate carbon and they are tasked if they exceed the threshold. Benefits of carbon credits. We look at the environmental and economic benefits. How to buy carbon credits. For farmers, instead, it is how to sell carbon credit. You develop a project or you work alongside those that are working on the project. What are the criticisms around carbon credit? That was what we just looked at. So thank you very much. We'll take for questions and answers. Please email me, send me an email, reach out to me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and on Instagram. Thank you. So I'll be ending. Have a nice